We'll call this meeting to order. Haley, can we get a roll call, please?
Councilmember Backus.
Here.
Councilmember Bain. Here. Councilmember Husnick.
Here.
Councilmember Eigner.
Here.
And Mayor Winnick.
Here. I'll ask everybody to rise for Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, I'll look for an approval of the agenda.
So moved.
I'll second it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Brings us to open forum. Thank you. Christina Villoy? All right, we'll call her. We'll call her back in a minute. Dick Cheetah.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, and lady, council lady, Dick Cheetah, 21833 Healy. I got only a couple concerns. I've gone through your packet, and the first concern I had was is directed at the accounting from the for the first quarter. Okay, and the real concern I have, and what caught my eye, was on the cover letter, the second paragraph. Management has elected to omit substantially all the disclosures, and then it goes on to identify why. And basically that is the statement, they might influence the user's conclusions. That doesn't seem to be a real transparent way of putting things. And so I hope when you go over this, that you will look at this very carefully. And part of the reason I looked at it was the fact that the cash and investments went down $4 million in a quarter, first quarter. There's got to be some rationale for that, and I'd like you to address that part of it. Then when you go to your budget, identifying some of the areas that are short, there's got to be some rationale for that also. And primarily, you've identified your general fund being short, and your sewer fund, which is very unusual. It's always been a cash cow. Now, maybe nobody's paying their bill. I don't know. But I think I'd like to know. The other issue that I had and I looked at and I'm very disappointed in is the airport lease. Say what you want. All of us in this community own a piece of the land that's over there called Airport and Industrial Park. And to put up, I've been in business for over 50 years and I have never seen a lease that ran out for 35 years with 3 renewals. 5-year renewals, that's 50 years. And on top of that, the land that here is, as an example, is the issue that's coming before you tonight is 15,000 square feet, was just over a third of an acre. We all know the value of the acres over there was established a number of years ago and verified at the time that the county put their project together down there at $100,000 an acre with the infrastructure. Now, you can't convince me that you can lease a third of an acre that has a value of $35,000 for 10 or 11 cents a square foot a year, that's $140-some a month. Folks, you're giving away our money. That's not the way it goes. I think something should be done, and it should be done for the benefit of the whole community, not a handful of people.
Thank you. And Christina.
I actually wasn't expecting to speak now because I'd already spoken with Dan about this. But
You don't have to if you don't want to.
well, I think we kind of discussed it, and I'm going to actually email him a lot of the information that I have that we need to have reconsidered. It was regarding an outdoor event permit for the temple, which we have court orders stating basically they are not the rightful board that should have been requesting any of this. So he was actually going to ask that that be looked at and see what we can do. But I'll send all that information to Dan if there was anything else.
No, once we receive the information, I'll work with Bridget here on just kind of, because this is all new as of basically 15 minutes ago. So it's a relatively new issue, and that's the advice, is basically if we get all the information, we'll take it and perform the legal review and see if there's what course of action is, if any.
Yeah, no, and that's all we're requesting, and seeing what can be done, if anything, and if not, kind of why. But we just want to make it right. The Lao Temple is actually holding a festival this coming weekend, and the individuals who requested the permit are not the legal board members.
Where's this location?
They're Broadway, kind of just past the cemetery behind the Cub Food. So, yeah, no, that's okay. No, that's okay.
All right,
So-
that's fine. If Dan's got the information or you're in communication.
Yeah, I'll send all that information to him, and then we'll get that answer that way.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you, though.
All right, that brings us to the consent agenda. I'll look for a motion or changes there too.
I'll make a motion that we approve items A through J and removing item B to the regular agenda.
I'll second the motion.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. So, you want that right at the end of the regular agenda, or should we take six?
Take it now.
Might as well do it now. That's typically, rather than putting it on the regular agenda, we'll discuss that one. So that brings us to item 6B, first quarter financial report.
So I just wanted to follow up on a couple of the items that Mr. Cheetah brought to our attention. And of course I lost it, references the auditor's compilation report. And I just wanted, so he made the astute observation that management's elected to omit the financial disclosures and the cash flow statements. I did just want to point out that that is a standard quarterly, that is standard language in our quarterly compilation report. We as a board have not decided to have an audited financial statement every single quarter. And so the full disclosure that you're looking for happens once a year. And when we get the 2017 annual financial report, that'll have the full, all of the footnotes that you're looking for. We could have a conversation about having that on a more frequent basis, and I'm sure the auditing firm would be happy to perform that. But I think the packet that we have is customary for a quarterly, just a quarterly report. And so just wanted to point that out. It's standard, it's customary, and the full packet is something that we will get when we get the full audit here, Dan, probably in a few weeks.
Next meeting, the audit will be, we just had the audit meeting 2 weeks ago, so they're finalizing right now, and it'll get brought forward the 25th meeting is scheduled for.
Okay. And then the other item I wanted to talk about was, and also to Mr. Cheetah's question, was on the negative impact to the general fund. And I believe, Dan, if you could confirm, that's primarily related to the timing of revenue on property tax payments?
That is correct. I did confirm that with AEM, that the impact on general fund is due to the fact that we have not yet received our disbursements for the taxes, so we had to dip into the reserves to cover those bills, but we'll be reimbursed coming, I think she said, it's not too far off from now.
Typically, I believe that's July.
Yeah, I think that sounds right.
So with that, I'd make a motion that we approve the first quarter financial statements.
I'll second it.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. All right. Item 7A, Building Department truck purchase. Al?
During the March 26th council meeting, $25,000 was set aside to purchase a vehicle that would be shared between inspections, zoning, and building maintenance. I presented that at the May 29th council meeting, and Councilmember Ed Eigner had asked if we would look into pricing of a cargo van, and I also had a discussion with all the department heads to determine whether a cargo van or a pickup truck was the way that each department wanted to go. And the overall consensus was to go with a pickup truck. In looking at the cargo van, some of the issues that I uncovered were that they just generally do not make a 4x4 cargo van unless you go with a 1-ton. And pricing for a 1-ton vehicle starts at about $54,000. And so that really put that kind of out of our range for what was budgeted. I did provide pricing for a half-ton van, but that's two-wheel drive. And my concern with using a two-wheel drive van would be snowfall in the winter and driving on construction sites with vehicle potentially getting stuck. So overall, our recommendation is still the same, to purchase a 2018 Ford F-150 Super Cab XL four-wheel drive from Anderson and Cook Ford for $27,392.33. And that would be shared between inspections, zoning, and building maintenance.
Any questions, any?
No, I think that's the way to go. I've always felt that way because a lot more utility with a pickup truck, really, and it's four-wheel drive.
So, just to clarify, building inspections, and, because I wasn't here for the discussion, so I've got to bring a little bit up to speed. The building inspectors have vehicles right now. This would be in addition to that, or replacing one, or I'm just...
Well, we've got, currently we've got one inspection vehicle, and so the inspectors, if they need a second vehicle, pull from one of the 4 old vehicles that we have in, that sits behind the building that were used for building maintenance. 2 of them are in pretty poor shape, and 2 of them are in okay shape, except one of the 2 that's in okay shape is a 5-speed. And so the younger people that drive don't know how to drive a stick. And so that creates an issue. So what our plan was to replace 2 of them with 1 vehicle and then share those vehicles between all 3 departments. Because every once in a while, we'll have commercial inspections going on and residential inspections going on at the same time. And so what happens is inspection workers will end up taking their personal vehicle to go out on a site to inspect if they don't have a vehicle that's available to do that. So it doesn't happen frequently, but it does happen.
And Dan, now that we're doing some outsourcing of inspections, they provide their own vehicle?
Yeah, they do. The current Minspec, they use their own vehicle for inspections. This would be, if this would be for city staff only that would use that, not a contract inspector.
Okay. And I guess last question, Chief Peterson. Right now, police department vehicles, like the SUVs that you're driving, they're sold at public auction, or do we,
They're sold at public auction, correct?
at 100,000
auction.
miles, or wherever?
Yeah, 5 years or 100,000 miles, whichever comes first. Usually 100,000 miles comes first. Usually around between 4, 5, or 6 years.
Okay. I guess that answers that part of the question. I'm not against buying a new vehicle for this, but I know, Chief Newman, we've had discussions with the evolving needs of our fire department and equipping it properly as we go into the future. And I'm just trying to see where everything fits together, where the city gets the best value, and can we bridge this need with, potential existing or equipment that might come online? That's my question is this gonna be the right fit, or, do we need to have further discussions? Because I know I'd like to see some bigger investments in our fire department. As we talk, response vehicles there. I'm gonna start running out of room here pretty quick in that, so.
Well, I'm not sure. It all depends on the vehicles that police is releasing, the shape that they're in, what their maintenance cost is. I'm not sure when you have vehicles that are coming up for replacement.
Usually for us, well, right now we have the Ford Explorers, and if the departments need more of a pickup type of a vehicle, that's not gonna help you in that aspect. When we get rid of them at 100,000 miles, or sometimes it's 105, 110, one of the biggest reasons we do get rid of them is because the maintenance and the repair costs are really skyrocketing. That's when the big things go out, the transmissions and things like that. We do sell them at auction anywhere from, at the low end, that might be $2,500 we get back. At the high end, I think we've had one sell at $6,000. It just depends on that buyer. And it is nice when we have the newer vehicles, because we aren't having to pay those costs of the repair and maintenance, and also after 3 years, it's the 3-year, 36,000 mile warranty, which is nice to have as well.
I got a question along those lines. I know, Chief, you and I have chatted before about the age of your chief's vehicles getting up there. Is there something that you'd like to move down along the line and maybe look at replacing one of the chief's vehicles as a new purchase and moving one of your existing chief vehicles down to building maintenance?
Well, currently, the vehicle that I drive is a 2012, and then we go into a 2006. And so that vehicle, the new vehicle will go to me because I put the most miles on it. And when you just move the cycle of vehicles down, we do have an old Ford Ranger, which is a 2006 as well, that wants replacement of the new chief's vehicle. That will be a fourth inspection vehicle. But the contemplation for potential the fire inspector, because that's who drove that vehicle previously, is kind of where that's aimed to go at. But then we're starting at a vehicle that's 12 years old and about 75,000 miles.
Now, this vehicle you said is getting shared between 3 departments. Is this gonna get the use that we're looking to see out of it while it still has its warranty?
I believe so, because inspections is out frequently, zoning's busy, drive around and looking at all the complaints that comes in, and then building maintenance. They're pretty busy with the vehicles, running things for police auction, picking up stuff from maintenance buildings and moving it around the community. So the vehicles actually do get used quite often.
All things considered, you'd still like to see this purchase go towards, again, the building maintenance vehicle and not necessarily moving one of your chief squads down?
I would, because it will eliminate 2 vehicles that are, in my opinion, not safe to drive. One has a stop sign in the floorboard that keeps you from seeing the ground. And then the other one, maintenance cost is expensive, and our third one is a 5-speed, which people can't drive. So I initially was looking that this one vehicle would replace 3 vehicles, and that may ultimately, next year, may see the 5-speed go away if we continue to hire people that can't drive a stick.
New job description item.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yep.
And you said the one vehicle was 12 years old with just 75,000 miles on it?
Yes.
Okay, so they only get 6,000 miles a year?
Yeah, once they go to the paid-on-call status, then you're putting on 2,500 in the ballpark for mileage. Being that I'm full-time and run to meetings and other things during the day, I'll put on probably 20,000 miles, between 15 and 20,000 miles a year. But the paid-on-call guys are putting on 2,000 maybe.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Go ahead, Ed.
So Al, you said your vehicle's coming up when?
It's actually in the CIP for replacement this year.
So that one's gonna move down then, right? Chief 2 will get yours?
Yep, and Chief 3 right now is driving the Ranger, which was the inspection vehicle.
So Chief 2's goes to Chief 3?
Mm-hmm.
And the Ranger is not good enough for inspection, is that what you're saying?
Well, no, the Ranger was anticipated to be used for fire inspections. We talked about potentially bringing that position back on this year.
We don't have that position, so what happens to that vehicle?
That vehicle will then sit with the other vehicles.
So we have a vehicle, is that not true?
Yes, but it's all lighted up with warning lights and siren.
We can get the inspection done faster.
Yeah, but for building maintenance and zoning, do you want a fire truck going out for that?
No, I just want to know how many vehicles, I'd say get rid of the Ranger too, instead of just having vehicles sitting around to pull maintenance on and do all these things, I'd say drop that.
Okay.
And I think just as a point of clarification, it has been kind of the plan where the worst, I mean, the building maintenance has kind of got kind of they're kind of the collection point for all of the vehicles as they go down. And I think as we kind of get this, if this truck gets approved, that would be kind of become the one newer vehicle. But the other ones that are there, the 5-speed, the other vehicles that are there, I mean, they may have lower miles. Like when I got in the truck that had the stop sign on the floor, I looked at the odometer, I'm like, well, it doesn't have many miles on it. But they're hard miles. They don't really ever leave the city of Forest Lake.
That's my point, get rid of those vehicles.
Right, and that's what we would
Get rid of
do.
the 5-speed, get rid of
Yep.
the one with the stop sign, and get rid of the Ranger, and then buy a new one for the one you're proposing.
Okay.
Well, and, I mean, building inspections are also / firefighters, so, you know, the vehicle's being used by hopefully the same personnel anyway, so I don't think there's gonna be a conflict over who gets to use the vehicle, so. Any further discussion? Look for a motion?
I would make a motion that we approve the purchase of a new vehicle with the caveat that we dump the unused vehicles.
I'll second it.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Dan, can you take us through the Chris Olson Airport lease?
Yeah, members of the council, during the March 26th city council meeting, council did direct staff to enter into negotiation with Chris Olson regarding the commercial lease on Lot 1 at the Forest Lake Airport. Just for a point of reference, so everybody knows exactly what we're talking about here when we're discussing Lot 1. Make sure we pull up on your screen here. Just give it 1 second. There we go. Lot 1 is basically this section right here where the plane is sitting. General terms, it's the one lot that when the airport was developed, there was not utilities brought up to it. It was basically kind of designed as a lot that could be used for commercial operations to happen at the airport, so there was no actual infrastructure that was installed for sewer or water to the site. When we first had those conversations back in March, there was some discussion of Mr. Olson redesigning the lot from the original design that was as part of the original lease. He was looking at if a new designed lot would better fit the project he was putting forward. As we kind of got into the negotiations, we kind of looked at what the lot redesign kind of entailed. At the end, it was basically, they made the decision to keep Lot 1 as designed in the original lease, which is a pad-ready site out here, a shovel-ready site for construction to begin, so there was no redesign, so that didn't trigger watershed, that didn't trigger all the other kind of redesign work that would go into redesigning Lot 1. Basically, the terms of the lease then became the point that we negotiated out. What we kind of came up with was he was looking for a longer lease term to better suit his business operations. So we did adjust the original lease terms on an amendment from 25 to 35 years. He also was looking for additional terms to be added onto that for some longevity of the lease. So we did have 3 additional 5-year terms. So the total lease, if all 3 of the renewals are executed, would be up to 50 years. There was direction from council to tie the lease to MnDOT funding continuing at the airport, which we did do. So there is an option where if the airport does lose MnDOT funding, we are able to get out of the lease before the 50 years is up. Mr. Olson also requests that the city give 24-hour notice prior to going out and inspecting the hangar. So that way if we're doing a hangar inspection, we just call the day before to make sure somebody's going to be there. We just can't pop in unannounced on the hangar. We added a language that basically said that he'd be able to sublease the premises. We're not going to unreasonably withhold his ability to sublease the premises. And again, he can speak more to that. It's based on his requirements for the operation of the way he envisions operating the hangar out there. He could give a little more direction here in just a second, kind of what he envisions with the subleasing out there. But we did agree to not unreasonably withhold his ability to sublease the hangar out. Another big point was that we're going back to the originally designed Lot 1. We're not making any lot adjustments out there. And then the cost of utility hookup is the responsibility of Northern Plains Aviation, which was Mr. Olson's business. If down the road the airport does do an expansion to the north and utilities are brought up, expanded to the north there, since he's already making the investment to hook up to the current location, as utilities are expanded north, the city then would just hook them into the new utility as they move forward. So basically, we're not double charged. He's not going to have to pay twice to hook up to the utility service out there, which is, again, pretty standard for us. So that's kind of the basis of the negotiations, the amendment that we did negotiate out. We did follow the direction that council did provide in that March 26th meeting as we kind of went into negotiations. So with that, if Mr. Olson wants to have any other thoughts from his side of it, if not, I'd be happy to answer any questions the council may have kind of on the lease negotiations that we went through.
Hi, Chris Olson, Northern Plains Aviation. There was just a couple things that we wanted to talk about there. The subleasing, we came up with something that was fairly agreeable with that, but our concern is just that when we have different aircraft and stuff in there, a lot of times we'll put them under different LLCs. It's a liability issue with airplanes. You don't have everything under the same roof. You'll have different entities they're all under us, but they're all sort of subleasing under there. We just want to make it easier so we don't have to come to a council meeting every 2 weeks to go ask to put another airplane on. That would probably drive everybody crazy. So I think Bridget came up with something she recommended. As long as they were year lease terms, that would give us enough time to get in here. Maybe we can do them in bulk, a couple at a time.
I think a point of clarification on that is in conversations with Chris on this, it sounds like a lot of times they may be bringing a rental plane in for a month to see if it's going to, if that plane gets rented out, they'll probably keep it for longer than a month duration. So when they talk about sublease, they're not subleasing out the entire hangar. The Northern Plains Aviation would still maintain control of the hangar. It's more like they're basically renting a parking space out. And as a part of that, there was some discussion as if it's a short-term, 1-month term, that's more his internal business operations, not necessarily the city doesn't really probably want to get into the business of approving every 1-month term, like on a parking, I equated it to basically leasing a parking space out from like a long-term parking at the airport. However, if he has one that, say, he gets a plane in there that's doing, really good rentals, he's gonna keep it in there for over a year, at that point, since there's some longevity there, there's gonna be some stability there, that would be brought forward as an option, then the council would say, I'm gonna sublease out this corner, for a year term. That was kind of an option, kind of a work between the current subleasing language that was in there and kind of what his requirements would be, as he operates the business out of the hangar space out there. And again, tied to all of that, kind of the overarching thing is that all uses would need to be aviation related. We couldn't, I used the bad example of if you wanted to open up a, say a gun shop in there, we couldn't sublease a corner for that use. It has to be aviation related. So that's the overarching, the entire thing has to be aviation used at that, because it's a commercial aviation business is what he's going to be operating out at the airport.
Will those subleasers be leasing directly from him, or does the city have involvement just to maybe keep out bad actors?
Most of it, I believe it'd be, the way he described it, they'd be directly it'd be a business operation decision from Northern Plains Aviation and the plane that's in space. The city.
Yeah, we're just a simple example, like I have a friend of mine that has an airplane that he's not using, it's up in Brainerd. He wants to bring it down and put it on the rental ticket. So we'd manage that aircraft, that's how we make money, and then we also make money by leasing that space to him. Since they own it, they're responsible for the maintenance, everything else. If it's not moving and it's not making money, we're gonna kick it out of there. I mean, we're not a junkyard. It's not a storage unit, so they need to be moving. Otherwise, it's not doing anything for us.
Sure, I just wanted clarification that the lease contract's strictly between the city and your business, and that any of your subleases are between them and you?
Yeah.
And the city doesn't get between that relationship?
No.
So this is a very common business.
I just wanted clarification on that one, because it just seemed that the city had to approve every sublease. I wanted to make sure that wasn't the circumstance, that we'd hinder his business.
I think that's what they're trying to clear up.
Yeah.
So to clarify, Mayor and members of the council, Councilmember Backus, that's correct. The way the lease is currently structured right now, there are kind of two different avenues for city approval. One is assignment of a lease, and that's where the city is more concerned because now you've got someone taking over the lease. That's not what's proposed here. This is just subleasing, and it's really just to ensure, again, primarily that the types of uses that are occurring are the types of uses that the city wants and are allowed at the airport. So I don't know in the past how that has typically come up. I don't think there are a lot of subleasing relationships. Mostly we've seen assignments between one entity to the next. So the proposal was to revise the subleasing language to say that the premises or a portion of the premises may be subleased for a term of less than a year without city approval, and that's cumulatively, so you can't do, 364 days. But anything over a year would require city approval because it would be more of a long-term relationship.
Is that language in the lease?
So it is not this, the language right now in the proposed amendment only says that the sublease must be approved by prior written approval of the council, which shall not be unreasonably withheld, which is a qualification that was added to the lease. The proposed durational limitation is not included in this amendment. That's sort of a kind of late-breaking requested revision. So if the council is interested in that proposal, someone could make a motion to approve the amendment with the inclusion of that language to that effect, and we could go ahead and make that, or we could revise it and bring it back for council approval if you'd prefer to see it in writing. I think the other issue that we touched on briefly was that there's some confusion regarding the lease holder in this particular case. So the lease agreement is between Christopher Olson and the city. It was signed by Christopher Olson, it looks like on behalf of Northern Plains Aviation. My understanding in speaking with Mr. Olson is that the intent was for the lease to be held by the entity Northern Plains Aviation. So again, that's kind of a second change here with council approval. Then the lease amendment would clarify that the lessee is actually Northern Plains Aviation Incorporated, not Christopher Olson, the human being. And I don't know if that's also something you were looking for with respect to the other lot you lease as well.
Yeah, we were trying to get both of those under there, but it got to be a little bit of a mess up front, so, but now's a good time. Yeah, I mean, if we could, we'd love to have this lease that we're talking about now adopted, and we'll pay the commercial rate for that private hangar. That way, if we put something in there, we're legally under the same umbrella, so you know what we're doing. Otherwise, that other one is just a private hangar again. If we can, I mean, I don't want to waste a lot of time with it. We're not going to build it right away, but if we can adopt that to this, that would be great.
If we
pay
can,
more
I'd like
money
to
for
see
it.
You've been patient.
we're working on it.
So I need to clarify something with.
Sure.
You know, a big portion of our revenue at the airport is personal property tax, or, you know, that portion, not the lease, but, is it personal property tax instead of just property tax? Something like that. If he's subleasing these out and it's not his property, how does that affect our revenue coming in from that?
Well, if I believe I answered your question right, I mean, we still are gonna maintain the same lease revenues coming in, so we're, you know, charging him the lease rate for what he's leasing from the city, you know, and then
Right.
basically he's then, you know, if he subleases out that space, you know, that revenue is on his business, that's how he makes the money as the commercial operator, is that space gets leased out, so we'd still collect the normal tax that we get based on building value and, lease rates on there, and then, you know, whatever business operation he gets on it, he would tax at, you know, the corporate rate or whatever the rates that he'd fall under for Northern Plains Aviation.
Okay.
Yeah, that doesn't, you get paid the same, that doesn't
If
change.
it's not affecting our revenue stream there, that, you know, that part's fine with me. I do want to hear, banning parachuting is something that we want to discuss before we go ahead and execute a commercial lease, because it has probably been by far the biggest complaint we had for noise. And if we can address that before we execute another commercial lease, I'd like to hear if anybody else is on board with banning parachuting or not.
It's really two separate issues, and I don't see any reason why we would want to hold up what they're doing because of that. I think that's what you're asking to do.
If we execute the lease before we ban it, he's kind of grandfathered in. If he chooses to have.
I want nothing to do with that. Zero. We're not, I mean, never say never, but that's not the business I'm in.
That's why I want to do this now before
Yeah, but
we
I mean,
say never.
that's really, those are completely separate. I mean, we're in the rental, the instruction, the finance, we're in that business. Those guys that were doing that before, that's all they were doing. That's a huge operation to undertake that, I mean, I don't skydive, I'm not licensed to skydive, I don't plan on doing it, so, I mean, that's it. My business partners, they don't skydive. We're not skydiving. We can go do it with them in Wisconsin.
Ed?
If the lease is executed in the name of Northern Plains Aviation, and I don't want to wish you any bad luck, but say Northern Plains went, for whatever reason, became insolvent, what happens?
Like any other business, I mean, it's in the lease that the property gets repossessed. We're gonna have a pretty substantial building there. I don't think it's gonna err on badly for Forest Lake if that were to happen.
And with what you're planning and building there, I haven't seen the layout of what you're planning, but it isn't going to hinder access to the north side of the airport.
No, it'd be within the original lot footprint that was envisioned for that space, so they'd be able to build to the original lot dimensions that when the airport was laid out, so it should fit. Before, I think we had the implications, when we redesigned Lot 1, that's when we kind of looked at, was the building an impact and how's that gonna play out, but going back to the original Lot 1, it's in line with the original vision for that space.
It's part of the original ALP.
Yep.
And now our private hangar lease is 30 years?
No, they're 25 years.
Or 25, okay.
But they're renewable on 5-year increments, I believe.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that was kind of a standard that a lot of different places use, so that we use that as kind of a basis way back when.
Well, just trying to keep them all on, as level a playing field as we can, and, going from 25 to 35. Are we gonna get pushback from the private hangar owners?
I think the difference really is the fact that they're private airplane hangars rather than a commercial operation. And it's they're gonna have a much bigger investment there. And,
Part of that, if I might say quick, is that pad, even though we're saying it's pad ready, it's really not pad ready. And so that Forest Lake doesn't have to come in and do that, that was part of our negotiation. If you can give us some time to try and make that money back, we're gonna do the pad work. We're gonna have to level that, we're gonna have to bring in dirt, level it, sewer, water, electric. I mean, that's gonna come in off us. Otherwise, you know, we have to ask you to do it. So that's part of our asking for a longer time. We need that time. As far as that other hangar, we would like that to be a commercial entity too, because we don't want somebody upset because we're only paying 9 cents instead of 15 or 20 or whatever the commercial rate goes to off the CPI. We'd rather that they just, you know, if they're both under that entity, we'll just pay the same amount. We get taxed as a commercial hangar as well.
Mara, you had a question?
So I'm mulling over your question about banning parachute operations, or skydive operations. I think my question is more for Bridget. Where do we best do, if we were to do that, ban skydiving operations, where do we best do that? Seems like there's somewhere else within airport regulation that we would do that rather than in the lease document. Now, I understand if we were tonight getting ready to sign a lease with an operation that might be contemplating that. I know you're not, but it's good to ask that question now, but where would we do that? Is that, it seems like the lease isn't, that there's a broader regulatory framework to do that.
So Mayor and members of the council, I think that there is a reference in section 7 of the lease to something called airport guidelines, and I'm not certain exactly what those look like, and so that might be part of the conversation for the next agenda item. But that seems to be the most appropriate place to sort of address that particular use going forward. These leases are sort of more standardized leases, and so I think the reference is just to, you can do what's allowed under the airport guidelines, under the FAA regulations, if applicable, under the state regulations as applicable. And so that's sort of the structure for these particular leases.
Okay.
And do we have any hours of operation for the airport for a business?
I don't know if that's ever been discussed. I mean, it's,
Aviation is a 24-hour a day, you know, 24-hour, 7 days a week business. I mean, it's, we don't really have just, this airport is not really set up like some airports where you'd get a lot of traffic in the middle of the night, like a Teterboro in New Jersey or something like that, where they're just nonstop running. We're just not long enough, we're not big enough, there's no approaches, there's power lines on one side, there's a lake on the other. You're not gonna get that kind of traffic here. You might get some night landings, but it's short. I mean, there's a lot better options if you're gonna start doing things that are too, you know, risky, I guess you should say.
the other issue that I'd bring up is of where that building location, it's a half a mile from anything. There's not, you're not near any roads, you're not near any houses.
I want to ask questions. I mean, if we bring an aviation school in and they're practicing takeoffs and landings, you know, till 10 o'clock at night, I don't think we're gonna have too many happy neighbors on.
Well, you're still gonna wanna, so I've had students out there already, and you're generally gonna go someplace, you're gonna take them up to one of the longer runways, or you're gonna head over to Anoka because they need to learn how to use the tower. And those are 5,500-foot runways. You can go over there in 5 minutes and bounce around all day long with an air traffic controller and come back and make your final short field landing. The requirements for a private pilot student's only 2 hours of nighttime, and it's across country. So you're only gonna do one landing. So I don't see anybody doing copious amounts of bounces there. And we are gonna do some flight instruction, but that's not our main focus as well. I mean,
Yeah, I just want to ask questions before we sign a lease.
Yeah.
You know, we need to get those hesitations out of the way. And we're representing everybody in Forest Lake, including, you know, all those people on Clear Lake. We've got new senior housing going up right next to the airport.
Yeah,
It's
no,
better
I
to
understand.
deal with it now than
Sure,
than
yeah, no,
later.
I can appreciate it. And like I said, we're, even if we do some flight instruction, we're not gonna be like a flight safety that's got 120 airplanes out there. This hangar itself is gonna be 9,600 square feet. You could probably fit 10 airplanes in there, and they're not all gonna fly the same. We have different birds that are going in there that are long distance. They're gonna take off and go 3 hours, and you won't see them for a weekend.
Sure. Ed?
All your aircraft are fixed wing, you're not gonna do any helicopter?
No.
Any other questions or input?
My big question, we already covered a bit, it was in the approval process for the sublease, and the language we have right now just assumes that the criteria are known, and I would prefer, I guess, to have the criteria stated in the lease, and so my recommendation would be that we should we adopt that we do include the language that Bridget had suggested around approval process of greater than a year versus less than a year? I just think it's cleaner. If that's the agreement, let's get it in and take any questions off the table for later.
We agreed to it in concept, so if you're all fine with it, then we are. I guess if it turns into, I'm here every 2 weeks, we can discuss it later, but I think that should work fine. You know, it gives us enough time that if we put an airplane on and we're busy, I can wait till a meeting and then come in and say, hey, this is what we're doing.
That wasn't my understanding was you would only have to come in, maybe, and I might misunderstand, you would only come in if you were to have a plane that was going to last longer than a year or to be on site longer than a year. So this, I'm also trying to avoid the scenario of enjoy when you're here, but you probably don't want to be here every meeting, right?
Right.
So if there's something administratively that, and it sounds like the language has been worked out, I would suggest that.
The other question I had is, I believe at one of the meetings you mentioned you might do aircraft repair or aircraft painting.
Well,
if something like that were to happen, what hours of operation would that entail?
Well, that would probably be a 9 to 5. Nobody wants to work in the middle of the night for that. That's, I mean, we'll have to have some kind of maintenance there. We're gonna have enough airplanes. We'll probably have an on-site mechanic that'll come in and work there, or maybe 2. But they're generally 9 to 5ers. They don't like sitting up all night. I mean, I will probably not be there all night, so I can't imagine anybody else is gonna really want to. We'll probably have some kind of emergency number if you came in and landed and the airplane doesn't work. You could call our number and get any one of us to come out and help. But I don't see us sitting out there 24 hours a day at this point.
What's your expected schedule to start construction of the hangar itself?
Yesterday.
Okay, so.
I mean, as quick as we can get the permits, we're ready to go.
Because in this lease, I mean, we're leasing them the property, but is it still just a 1 year they have to start building?
It's 2 years, Your Honor, from date of execution of the original lease, which was done in December of 2017.
Okay.
2 years.
Oh, yeah, there it is, within 2 years.
I have one brief question.
Sure.
With regards to that 1 year lease, you said you'd like to reevaluate if that aircraft is profitable to you. So are you gonna come to us anytime you anticipate renting one out for a year? Or is this, hey, we're coming up on a year, we're gonna continue? I mean, is that, like I said, 364 days? All right, you're gonna bring it to us. And
Well, part of brokerage and things like that, so like I made an example, we do have an airplane that's coming down from, and they want to try and rent it out. It's a 172 with a 180 upgrade. There's a float kit for it. We're not teaching floats. So we're going to put a cruise prop on it. We're going to stick it in the hangar. If somebody wants to rent it, great. If it doesn't seem to be working well, we'll probably put it up for sale for them at the hangar. And so that would be a great example of less than a year. It's going to come in, it's probably going to be out by next spring. Somebody will buy the float kit up there and the airplane down here, and it's out of here. So these things could happen, you know. Airplanes that are busier, they start to TBO, they start to time out the engines. And when you start getting into expensive engine rebuilds, sometimes you'll sell them with just a few hours left on them rather than rebuild them. So it's not uncommon to see airplanes, you know, roll in the door and a few months later roll back out with a replacement. So that's where we just brought up the, you know, what the way things happen in aviation, it happens quickly enough. It's all airplanes, but it happens quickly enough that, you know, you may not want to see me every 2 weeks.
No, I understand. I'm just curious if that 1 year is going to be after or foresighted.
Well, so let's say we buy an airplane, we just bought one today. We bought another airplane today. So if that airplane works out really well for us and we decide, hey, I think we're going to keep this for 2 or 3 years because we like it, then we'll come in and say, hey, we've leased to this entity. We own it. It's our airplane. It's going to sit in that hangar. This is the spot one. And that's what I mean, it wouldn't be very complicated. It's just another airplane that will own the LLCs most likely, or will know exactly who it is and have an agreement with them, so. Pretty standard in aviation, by the way. It
is very standard.
Yeah, this is, if you go anywhere and you want to put your airplane in a hangar, they're really expensive to fix, so you have to really have your i's dotted and your t's crossed, because, you know, you ding a wingtip, it could cost you 20 grand to fix it. People start pointing at each other, so those things need to be taken care of.
So I guess, you know, we've got quite a few questions on here. Does anybody have concerns with going from 25-year to 35-year on the lease? Like I said, maybe clarify some of these steps before we get into a motion. The 3 additional 5-year leases?
You know, if everything's going well, why not?
We're tied to that MnDOT funding, and that kind of takes all my concern out.
There's about 99 years of it
It takes my concern out on that one.
Yeah,
from the original purchase.
I've gotten comfortable with the term. I mean, from where we started this conversation a few months ago to where we are now, to adjust to 35 with 3 additional periods, and we've tied it to MnDOT funding. I'm comfortable, given the model, also given the footprint. This is a smaller footprint than what we had originally contemplated, so it's a smaller amount of property that we're locking up in a longer lease. I've gotten comfortable with that part of it.
Yeah.
Well, the one concern I do have is because there's been so much controversy over airport leases in general. Now with this change in this lease, should this go back to the airport commission? Are we gonna have a big rhubarb between some of the commercial people?
But it was brought forward at the, I mean, it was, I guess, that wasn't discussed in great detail at the airport commission meeting. It was just that, you know, it was mentioned that we were, you know, kind of finalizing the lease terms there. I mean, I guess that is an option. I mean, that is a potential. But again, I don't think we have any commercial leases currently active at the airport. I think everything is still, well, maybe Skydive still has a lease, but.
Well, hey, there's
quote unquote what I call residential.
Yeah, I don't wanna pour salt in the wound, though. We're trying to get past things resolved the way it is now.
Dan and I have taken a pound of flesh out of each other over the last 6 months, and I think we've done a pretty good job of sorting this out in something that I think you can, I mean, it doesn't have everything that I want in it, put it that way, but we could pallet it and move forward, and we can work with this lease. When we started the project, the lease that we actually signed, we kind of got into this deal and we signed it, we paid for it, we did everything, and then we found out there's no support, there's nothing there. The lease doesn't address any of the commercial concerns, none. It didn't do anything, and so now we've gotten here 6 months later, we've already paid for the lots. And, you know, we'd like to try and continue to move forward. The way I see it, I think this is a pretty good footprint if you're gonna try and do more commercial leases. You know, I mean, it's a very good starting point. It puts you on pretty steady ground. It still gives pretty much all the control to the city council, and it allows us to operate in a way that we can do it commercially and feel comfortable throwing down $1 million without choking on it.
Chief Newman, given this is a commercial building, is there sprinklers, anything required of the hangar?
I believe that Chad and Donovan did look at that, and at this time for what the plans that were submitted, it did not require sprinkler systems.
Yeah, if I may, the break-off point is 12,000 square feet or 12,500 square feet. Above that, you'd have to sprinkle it.
Okay.
You can actually go to 40,000 square feet, but you have to partition.
Yeah, but each space
Right.
can't be more than 12,500 or whatever it is.
But we're not. We're at 9,600 square feet.
Mr. Mayor, I'd make a motion that we accept the lease as written. There's been a lot of work gone into this thing, and I'm certainly comfortable with it. And the amendment, there was an amendment that went with that too, Bridget. And that'd be part of my motion that we accept that.
The amendment to convert his other one to commercial as well?
So Mayor, if I,
That was mentioned and I didn't want to clarify.
I think what he's saying is he would pay the commercial rate on it.
Correct.
But I don't think you want to turn that hangar into a commercial necessarily, because if he sells it or whatever, I think you want to leave it as a private hangar. He's going to pay a commercial rate on it.
Okay, so we're just accepting that it would be treated as such.
Right.
Just so we can operate out of that hangar and somebody doesn't go, oh, but he's only paying.
Correct, you had brought that up, I wanted to make sure that clarification with the amendment was in there, so it was all, happy here. And, on that note, I'll second the motion.
Can I clarify the motion? So it's the change of the sublease arrangement, it's the paying the commercial rate, and also changing the name of the entity to Northern Plains. Are those the three amendments?
That,
Well, yeah, I accept the,
Okay,
yeah, those are the three
Okay,
amendments.
just wanted to clarify.
Yeah.
Okay.
all right.
I thought you were waiting for an answer from Bridget, so sorry. I put you on the spot, Bridget, sorry.
She was ready.
Well, thank you, and I am. So my understanding, Mayor and members of the council, is that the motion is to approve the amendment as drafted with the inclusion of language related to subleasing for a term of less than a year can be approved without, it does not require council approval, still requires compliance with the lease terms and aeronautical use. Additionally, the amendment will be clarified to indicate that the lessee is actually Northern Plains Aviation and not Christopher Olson. My understanding is your motion is that that would also be made, a change made to Lot 6, which is the second lease. So there's two lease agreements. Lot 6 wasn't something that was kind of on the table for discussion this evening. The amendment applies only to the Lot 1.
That's my motion.
Okay.
That's correct. It applies only to Lot 1.
All right, just one more question. This is, the extensions of the lease are tied to MnDOT funding. In here, it doesn't say at what level. I mean, if they're giving us $1, I mean, should we say at 80% or?
80% of what?
I think a lot can change in
It's a good point, but 80%.
Yeah, I mean, if they give us $1, they're funding us.
There is a schedule, I don't have it in front of me, but there is a schedule of how they fund different things at different rates. Some of it's 90%, some of it's 80, some of it's 60, you know, so. And I don't have that schedule in front of me, but Silas from Bolton Mink had that, so.
I think it's a really good point to bring up, but a 50-year lease is
I mean, it's a long time to have the city.
Maybe you guys have
having to
expanded and you
operate.
probably done
Well,
it
it's-
for half, you know.
You're already committed to a lot of time there, isn't it?
30 years as it
Well,
is, but-
99 years from the time they purchased that property, or helped purchase that property.
If,
Yes.
if MnDOT pulls out, we're in trouble. I mean, you're not gonna have to worry about an extension. I mean, this is
Yeah, they
pending that
promised they
they're
were
gonna
gonna
be.
pay for the overruns at the airport, and they didn't do that either, so.
Well, they do have a lease for 99 years, and, you know, they are supporting the airport at current time.
Is there a way to achieve what you're looking for without tying it to a dollar amount, instead that we are a MnDOT eligible airport? Because to your point, there might not be a project in a particular year, we may not have some funding, but we're still part of their, I'm not gonna know what the right word is, but we're still part of, we're a member airport of their
That's right.
program, or Sam, help me with what that would be, but.
We're one of 135 airports that they support in the state of Minnesota.
So is that a better tether rather than funding?
And
Because
it
funding can be.
varies from year to year, it goes by your CIP,
Right.
I mean, there's all kinds of things that
Right.
take place.
But if
I
we're
mean, this
still a
is a whole
member.
new caveat that we don't have on any other lease.
Yeah,
Well, there's no other business in the state, in the United States that has this.
yeah.
We're the only
Yeah.
one. I mean, we're tied to something that is nowhere else in the Twin Cities.
Yep.
So,
It's a completely different animal.
I think it's a good question, but being mentioned alone should be enough recourse that we can feel comfortable with it.
and like I said, don't be fooled by the 50 years. The reason is that we were looking for more time, you know, initially is because we have to make this investment in this pad. We got 160 tons of dirt to bring in. I mean, and nobody is exactly raising their hand to come do it for me. So we're gonna have to move some dirt and bring in some sewer, water, and electric, and that's not gonna be cheap. They charge by the foot, I believe, maybe you know Mayor Winnick, I think over 400 amps, isn't it 400 amps? I think they start charging by the foot to bring it into a commercial building. So it's not gonna be inexpensive by any means.
No, I know you're gonna have a significant investment, I appreciate that. I wanna work with you, I'm just trying to look at, we've had so many issues with the airport and with the leases and with MnDOT, the engineers of this or that I'm skeptical when it comes to anything out there because it always seems to backfire. And I'm just trying to cover the city's bases ahead of time. I'd rather ask the questions now than later.
Sure.
I really do want to see the skydiving issue addressed, and at least acknowledged, you've acknowledged that before we execute a lease, which is fine with
Well,
me for now.
I think rather than tying me to the skydiving, I think the city council, if you're gonna do that, should agree to do that to the airport itself. without-
Exactly, and I
It
think
really doesn't have
we should
anything
be
to do with
doing
my
that,
lease.
Yeah, as far as the rest of it goes, you know, I'm fine with this, but, you know, hours of operation, I think, is about the only other concern I have. And, you know, we can address that, as you come in for, you know, a hangar permit or whatever, you know, what hours you're gonna operate that, but, you know, I'm just trying to think of what might pop up, because we have had so many issues. This council spent way more hours than it should dealing with airport issues. And the Airport Commission itself has spent way too much time dealing with things that they shouldn't have to anyway. But unfortunately, that falls on your lap now when you're asking for something special. But
Yeah.
I'm fine with the rest of it, and, you know, I think we can get you accommodated tonight. But I do believe there are a couple of looming questions that are gonna come up and we'll deal with before, you know, the hangar gets approved in it.
Well, I mean, you know, I really want to say, I mean, we've worked pretty hard on this, and, you know, I've been doing aviation since I was 5 years old. So our job here isn't to come in and make enemies of everybody in Forest Lake. We want to do a good job, so you can come out and visit the hangar and, you know, have events and do things like that. That's fun. I can tell you, I do not want to be there at 2 o'clock in the morning. It's really bad if you're still there at 2 in the morning, right? So,
Yeah.
So, like I said, if we can get this to move forward, that'd be great. We'd like to build a hangar.
All right. Ed?
I do have one more question. As far as Rice Creek and the drainage is concerned, whose responsibility is that, yours?
It should be, as long,
We'll be into the regular sewer system. We don't have
No,
any.
drainage for the lot.
Oh,
Water.
that's already been surveyed.
yeah, that's, if I could answer that question, I mean, every lot there is 31 of them, were all part of that initial development that Rice Creek approved. Every drop of water that hits that airport area there all goes into that pond, eventually gets into that pond. That sits right behind, well, it's on the north side of this. But that's all been established. If you're on an established lot and the elevations are already established, that's all been taken care of.
So the drainage issues we are facing now because of the runway,
That's a different, completely
has
separate.
nothing to do with this lot.
Nope, has everything to do with the runway project.
All right. Any further questions? All right, we had a motion, we had a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Good
Thank
luck. And Dan.
Members of the council, just for your awareness, it's, at the last airport commission meeting, we brought forward a project for performing a legal analysis of the airport commission. There's been kind of a lot of confusion as to who's responsible for what, where do projects go, kind of, you know, how do we chart different aspects of projects through the airport commission? Does it go to airport commission first? Does it go to city council first? Is MnDOT involved? So they kind of clear up that, you know, misconceptions and get the airport on a clear path. What we proposed was performing a legal analysis of the airport commission and how they interact with the rest of city government. So what Bridget and I kind of talked about what that analysis would look like. Kind of came up, broke it down into 3 sections for the analysis. The first section is a comprehensive review of the existing airport commission related organization and structural documents, kind of the source documents for the airport commission. Then once that's done, take it up to the next level, which would then be the analysis of that structure within state statutes. So we'd have the state statute component figured out. And then go back on the operations side and take a look at any legal issues related to airport operations. So it's kind of a three-sectioned approach that we were proposed to do for this analysis. The comprehensive review of the existing Airport Commission-related documents we're looking at would basically be the minutes for the Airport Commission, any of the bylaws that exist for the Airport Commission, and then also look at any city council minutes related to the creation of the Airport Commission and its duties, so we can kind of really get those source documents that establish the Airport Commission, set what they're supposed to be doing, and then some of the minutes that kind of, support that documentation, so we can kind of get the founding documents together for the Airport Commission. Once all that's done, since the Airport Commission does have a MnDOT component and some state statutes that that potentially apply to operation of an airport, we then kick it up to the state statute level and look at what state statute apply to the Airport Commission and its composition, what state statutes apply to operations at the airport, and then also part of this would be MnDOT and aeronautical use requirements that guide operation of the airport. So kind of taking it up, looking at it from more of the state statute perspective to make sure that we're in compliance with all state statutes that relate back to airport operations. And then kind of go back to that, again, taking it back down and the legal issues related to airport operations at the local level again, structure of the Airport Commission. We need to make any changes structurally to the Airport Commission based on the research that's done. And then what are staff responsibilities at the airport level, city staff, airport manager, commission, kind of just starting to chart the courses of where responsibilities lie. The goal of this, again, if a project comes forward, if a question comes forward, we'll just know where it needs to go. We'll know that the Airport Commission sees this first before it comes to council. Council has direction, signs this. Airport Commission is in this lane. There's just been a lot of kind of confusion as to who's responsible for what. So the reason I brought this forward here tonight was basically looking at, is there anything else council would want us to look at as we perform this analysis? Airport Commission this was presented at the last Airport Commission meeting. They didn't have any additions at that time, but I just wanted to make sure, since there is some overlap with the city council, wanted to make sure there wasn't anything that we're missing in the analysis work. So once we kind of start, going into that we're not missing something that council would like to see us take a look at. So this is, at this point, just brought up for discussion point for the council, and any feedback you have on kind of the three-step plan that we have here for the Airport Commission legal analysis.
Personally, I don't see why we need it. I don't know why it was brought up. And if Bridget's willing to do this for free, I think it's great, but otherwise, how much is this gonna cost?
Mayor, members of the council, so that's a good question. I don't have an exact answer. A lot of it depends on what's located. I'm not sure exactly where kind of the direction came from, but I know that we have encountered some challenges in trying to figure out what is the Airport Commission and what state statutes apply. Are there bylaws that govern the structure and who does what? So the thought was, if the city wanted to move forward, this is something that a service our firm could provide. I know we've done a similar analysis for the South St. Paul Airport in the past. Certainly it's up to the city as far as whether or not it's something they want to approach at this time, but I know there have been questions raised about, well, what about this FAA requirement, or what about this state statute, and this is not how the commission is supposed to be composed, and things like that. So the goal of the analysis would be to really garner that institutional knowledge, pull it all together in one place, and have some sense of what might need to be addressed moving forward and which avenue different projects would go through. For example, that airport guidelines piece that was referenced in the lease that, we don't know if it exists, so that's part of the due diligence would be conducted. But certainly it was just a thought thrown out there if it's something the city wanted to pursue.
And are you performing it as part of like regular duties as, I guess, is this a separate statement of work with a separate fee structure assigned? Is this part of, I know we pay you for your work, but I'm trying to decide or gauge how much additional effort is this, or what is impact on legal fees for the city?
Certainly. So it would be billed just like any of our other regular rates. So at our regular billable hour rate, pursuant to our contract, there is no retainer in our contract, so it's not something that falls under that scope. So it would be an hourly based project. And I could certainly provide information about the South St. Paul project. Again, the scope is still a bit to be determined based on how much information is able to be pulled by staff for my review.
The point I would like to make is, well, a couple things. Number one, it's going to involve a lot of staff time from the city also. And there's only been one individual that has brought this in front of the Airport Commission. I believe there is this would fall under the leasing, and going back to the lease. To me, if members that are leaseholders don't like what the city council is doing in relation to the airport, they have recourse, they have mediation in their lease. If we're gonna spend money, let that person spend the money. I don't see anything that we should be doing.
Thank you, Ed.
There's also some question about the makeup of the airport commission. The airport commission is the only one where a city council member liaison is a voting member. It's the only commission we have out there like that.
It's always been like that.
It's that, but that's part of the question, and why is that? And so that's why this is being questioned and why it needs to be straightened out. If there was some, path that we could go to and say, this is exactly the way it should be, because now, as far as I'm concerned, the city never ever looked at the state statutes when they were developing this. And there are some suggestions in the state statute that say that that really isn't the way it should be. And that's just one thing. The staff responsibilities, I think that needs to be spelled out also. One of the reasons that this came up too, as far as the legal analysis for the airport and that thing, is you still have a couple of people out there having businesses that are non-aviation related in private hangars, and it should not be happening. And what mechanism is there to clear that up? And right now there isn't any mechanism, and I think this is a very important study to get it straightened out.
So I do have a concern. I appreciate the questions that are being asked, but I think we need to be careful or be specific on, are we trying to answer some very specific questions, which both the points that you just made were very specific questions, or are we trying to get a broader regulatory framework? Because what's I think being proposed is let's unturn every single rock and put together this framework, which could be a very long process. And I wonder if instead, if we would have a expedited, more efficient process, to have Bridget just do some specific targeted research to answer those specific questions. I could support that. I think there'd be some value in that. I would also say though, just from where I sit and from what we get questions on, it's a complex regulatory structure, and I don't have a great tool when people are, oh, that's Minnesota statutes, or that's an FAA statute, or that's something that's covered by the lease. It would be helpful to just have an inventory of the environment, just so that you have some broader understanding, or we would, as council, would have broader understanding of who has jurisdiction over what. But that's a broader document that isn't going to answer the specific questions that you're coming up with, because I think that would just be encyclopedias of information that I don't think we have an appetite to do. Timing-wise, I think the more specific questions probably are more time-sensitive, and so maybe just directing those to be researched might give us more efficiency, and then the broader questions we can fill in over time.
One of the things I noticed when I was trying to research some of the statutes that were quoted is if you take Minneapolis International, or probably St. Paul Airport, those commissions, those airport commissions, also have spending authority. This commission does not. We're strictly an advisory board to the council. Mm-hmm. So those fall under a totally different aspect than our commission does, from the way I read it. So the individual that brought this out, I think, is reading into it as though we were a large airport.
Seems like I don't want to underestimate the amount of work it would take to answer, but I think that's a very specific question that we could direct Bridget to bring back an answer on. That would be probably thousands of dollars cheaper than the much broader framework that at some point might need to get put together, but I think we're looking for some very specific answers.
personally, I don't see spending, you know, anything on this at this point. We're dealing with one individual, that's not willing to spend any money to go to mediation and is kind of flailing around trying to come up with every accusation they can. We don't need to respond to that.
Agree.
We have legal methods, and that's mediation. And at this point, I've got full confidence that the airport commission is doing their job and doing their job well. And I support that. People have differences of opinion, but I do believe that they're doing their job well. We as a council are approving leases, we're approving the spending out there. So I just don't see why we would consider, you know, going down a path like this, trying to recreate something that we already have, especially since, you know, basically the airport is leased out full right now.
You're right.
I think the mediation thing is a completely separate issue from getting some answers, more specific answers than we have. That's what I'm arguing.
It's such a minor question. I mean, if MnDOT said we had to do something, if MnDOT had any kind of issues with our airport, they would bring that up. They haven't. I haven't heard anything from the public except for, you know, one person that keeps bringing up the same $280 a year, and that's where this all, you know, started from. And I just don't see the city of Forest Lake spending thousands, tens of thousands of dollars doing all this research, everything else, when that still isn't going to satisfy that person unless we give them the answer they want.
I don't see where that's connected, but there's some other issues there that I'd sure like to have some specific answers on.
I mean, if I could propose something, one thing that could be done at a staff level to kind of help defray some of the legal expenses on this is that if staff were to go back and try to source other documents and kind of come up with, you know, a non-legal, you know, just kind of like, here's what we think the binding documents are, and then basically just have Bridget review it. So we're kind of performing like more along the lines of like the paralegal type work, where it's like, we collect the document set. A lot of this issue kind of comes forward, say we're discussing aeronautical use, you know, guidelines at the airport, or can parachuting be allowed or not. It's what body approves that. We may have the understanding, you know, right now we may think that it's the council, and, you know, that could turn out to be accurate. However, if with that state statute overlay, that could lie at the airport. We just want to make sure that as projects come forward, as policy comes forward, that they get pushed in the right path for it, and have a legal backing behind it, you know. And I think ordinarily, if this was just a straight city commission, we didn't have any MnDOT or a lot of like state kind of oversight, it'd be pretty clear. You could go back to the source documents like Parks, Lakes, and Trails Commission. It's an ordinance. It was pretty clear. The MnDOT overlay, that piece adds kind of another just dynamic to it that makes the issue a little bit more complicated, just to make sure that you maintain compliance. You know, at the end of the day, if staff were at least compile those source documents as an option, so we could at least kind of chart courses, so when aeronautical use discussions come forward, you know, then you can clearly say it's an airport commission recommendation to council, you know, and that could turn out to be the case. But again, the MnDOT component, the state statute component in terms of how airports are operated, adds a little bit of the, you know, quote unquote, the X factor that kind of complicates it, where it's not just a strictly local control like we would have with, you know, Planning Commission or Parks, Lakes, and Trail Commission or Human Rights Commission. So there's that extra component, which, you know, in my estimation, at least requires a little bit more legal analysis just to make sure that we're on the right.
Aren't we paying to have an engineer to answer a lot of these questions too?
Yeah, I mean, the airport engineer handles more the engineering side. I mean, the policy side, the policy discussion is more set up with how the legal component of the airport commission is set up. I mean, Silas's role is more, you know, are we building it to the right spec? Is the project designed properly? Those type of questions. This is more on the legal side, the establishment documents for the airport.
Yeah.
The only thing so far that I can see even conceding to is whether or not certain things out there are aeronautical uses. And if that truly is in violation, then we're obligated to do something about it. But all the other things that are brought up, this commission has been running for 20 years. Why now?
And can't we just pick up the phone and ask MnDOT for clarification on aeronautical use?
I've had conversations with Silas about this, and for that very reason, I said, does MnDOT have a very specific set of aeronautical use? And his response back to me at the time was, MnDOT does not necessarily want to get on the granular level of what an airport does. They basically say, here's some loose guidelines to follow for aeronautical use, and it's up to the airport commission or the local governing body to basically set the more specific standards, because they don't want to necessarily have to take the enforcement actions.
Can you forward those to us?
Yeah, I mean, I have a list of general ones I can definitely, compile. They have a reference in there's a website that has a reference list of pretty general aeronautical use standards.
But Dan, at the last airport commission, the commission chair said that there was a letter sent to the city.
Correct.
Regarding that we're in violation of proper airport use, aviation use.
There was.
Is that true or not true?
The letter stated basically, and I can forward it to council, basically stated there are certain guidelines, loose guidelines. If you need help setting guidelines up, here's some reference material. That's basically the gist of it. It didn't say you're in violation of subsection 5.2 of a,
Because that's the way it was put in front of the commission, that we're in violation.
Did they indicate reason for the letter or background or context on why the letter was sent?
I'd have to go back to the actual letter
Okay.
to get it. I don't recall that. I just know it was basically a general letter that just said, start a process, take a look at it. Here's some guidelines for aeronautical use. Again, kind of in line with what Silas had said, it's basically the nitty gritty of how the aeronautical use guidelines are established is deferred typically down to the local governing authority over the airport.
Sure. I mean,
So we get more information from the city.
I'd like to make a motion to table this thing until we get more information, in regards to proper aviation use at the airport. And then also in regards to the makeup, that whether or not we're in violation with me being a voting member as a liaison member from the council.
Could I make a friendly amendment to that? Could we also just get a ballpark number of what the South St. Paul Airport, what that study cost? Be just helpful to see if we were a similar airport, what that would look like if we were to pursue it. If it's $3,000, we bite. If it's $50,000, it's a different conversation. I think we should just know what that number looks like.
You do that, Ed?
Yeah, so I can add that to my motion that we get a ballpark estimate as what the cost might be.
I'd like to see an amendment that we get some things from staff too, just to see what we can do in-house first.
Yeah, I think that was part of Ed's.
That was part of it, Dan.
Did that research to.
Step one was the in-house.
Organization documents, if we can find those and go from there.
I'll second the motion with the amendments.
All right, motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right, motion carries. All right, that brings us to Ace Hardware invoices.
Should we approve the Ace Hardware invoices?
I'll second the motion.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Abstaining.
Abstain? All right. Winnick Supply invoices.
I'll make a motion, we pay the Winnick Supply invoices.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
And one abstain? Staff updates. Chief?
On Thursday, May 31st, we had our first joint fire board meeting of the year held here. We discussed, or I provided an overview of last year's fire runs, future equipment needs, and 2018 fire department goals. Just a lot of information was provided. Our next joint fire board meeting will be in July, and at that point, we'll be talking budget numbers. As I mentioned at our last city council meeting, we're doing our annual maintenance updates on our vehicles, and we did run into an issue with one of our tender trucks that had a cracked frame. due to rust jacking. They were able to repair engine 2. The good news is depth and location, it cost under $1,000 to actually have it repaired. When they looked at tender 2, or tender 1 out of Columbus, which is a 1985 Ford truck, they found that that had a crack frame as well due to rust jacking, and it had severe corrosion where the stainless steel water tank actually meets the metal frame of the truck. The company that provided the first estimate to repair engine 2 also provided an estimate to repair tender 1, and it was $41,500. And so what we're doing is we're in the process of having it looked at, tender 1 looked at Rosenbauer up in Wyoming. They actually performed a full body off restoration approximately 5 to 6 years ago. And so we're going to approach them with some questions on how this corrosion would occur in that short of a time. So currently the truck is out of service. We have it back at Station 2. Hopefully Rosenbauer will be able to take a look at it here this week and provide an estimate or guidance for repair on that truck. And I have a few other leads of companies that actually do restoration. I would like to get 3 overall estimates to determine what the next step with that truck is. So for right now, it's out of service. Hopefully within the next council meeting, I'll be able to provide another update on cost to repair. Any questions on that portion?
Al, with that truck being out of service, what does that do to your response?
Well, it definitely hurts us for water response. You know, much of the community for Forest Lake and Columbus is not hydranted. And so that truck itself carries 3,200 gallons. It's our largest water carrier in the fleet. And so when we get structure fires that occur outside the hydranted area, that's typically the first truck that leaves out of Columbus. So we'll change our tactics around a little bit. We've had a discussion with all of our officers, and this will just cause us to call mutual aid earlier and more often than we normally would, because you know, when we typically have a fire, we can bring 8,500 gallons, which is quite a bunch of water, but this is less 3,200 gallons at this point. So it operationally does hurt us, but it doesn't cripple us. It was a much more bigger event when it was one of our engine tenders that was down, because if one of those goes down, you don't have backup.
Maybe you mentioned this. Where is that on the CIP cycle for replacement? How many years out are we?
It wasn't listed for another 10 years. That has been the least expensive truck that we have operationally for annual maintenance, repair. Runs great, looks great. This is just in a really expensive, unfortunate expense potentially. And then I guess I'd even clarify further on that, if it does come back where everybody's in that same ballpark, then we're gonna have to look at adjusting CIP or other options. So hopefully in a couple weeks I'll have that information.
Thank you.
The replacement of a truck like that, what value would a new truck be?
I haven't looked at those numbers, but I would expect it to be between 250 to 300,000 for a truck like that. An engine with a tender is 550. So it's going to be less, but I don't know how considerably less. And that's something that if Rosenbauer comes back and says, yeah, the price is in line, it's going to cost this much. And the other estimates in that ballpark, it's something we're going to have to look at and see what our options are. A tender, you get a little bit more leniency as far as, looking at a used truck or how a truck is made up, because it typically doesn't have an engine. All it's doing is hauling water around. So I without looking at pricing, I'm assuming you'd be in that ballpark, maybe less.
I'm just questioning whether it's wise to be a 40-year replacement cycle in a state like Minnesota with the salt. I assume that's what's eating up the frames.
Yes, that definitely was a cause. Salt gets in between the two subframes, and then it rusts out, and it jacks the frame, which puts pressure on the side of the sidewall, and then it ends up cracking out.
I mean, we're turning squads over at 3 years, 100,000 miles. And here's something that is a must-need piece of equipment, and you're going 40 years out.
Yeah, well, just kind of following the replacement schedule that we've had in place, and after discussions with several council members here over the last few weeks, it's definitely something that we should look at replacing. We just, in talking with past chiefs, we just haven't had this happen before, and we've kept trucks for the replacement schedule that's in place. So maybe we've been lucky in the past, or the salt that we're using today is much harder on the trucks.
I think part of the issue you said was dissimilar metals in there.
Yeah, in Tender 1, they've got a stainless steel tank, and then they have a steel frame, and they used steel to attach the stainless to the frame. And so the tank itself's in great shape. The frame, except where the salt got into the in between where it rust jacked, is actually in decent shape as well. So uncertain why they just didn't use stainless to attach the tank to the frame.
So you said it was 5 years ago that it was completely rebuilt?
It was around 5 years ago, no more than 6 years.
Any idea how much that cost at the time?
I don't have that number. It's something that when I meet with Rosenbauer, they'll have the full history of that truck, and we'll sit down and look at it. And it's going to be a question that we're going to ask them. I mean, that truck goes out probably 20 calls a year for major structure fires. And how does a truck that's housed and washed after every run end up deteriorating in 5 years?
I'm thinking galvanic corrosion, dissimilar metals should definitely be looked at on that.
Yeah.
I mean, they do this for a living. They should hopefully have some recourse on their end about maybe omitting some of that cost for something they should have seen. Hopefully it comes back that way.
Oh, yeah, and just because the one estimate was so high doesn't mean that, somebody else can't repair it for something.
Yep, and that's why I'd like to get a couple different estimates to see what they can do.
Well, as our conversation goes, I think as we look in the future of the fire department, we really need to evaluate, new equipment, different equipment, not just replacing, but getting some different pieces of equipment, and sooner rather than later, I think, is where we're gonna end up being on some of that, so. Well, thank you for the report, even though it wasn't what we like to hear anyway.
Okay.
Any other questions for the chief? Chief Peterson.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor and City Council members, I have a few items for you here. Last night, the southwest section of our city was hit pretty hard with vandalism to houses, landscape, and vehicles. Unknown individuals damaged property and spray painted profanity on property as well. Our office is currently investigating, and if anyone has any information on who may have caused the damage, please call our department at either 651-464-5877 or 651-439-9381. The next item I have for you is the new records management system was rolled out by the Washington County Sheriff's Office a few weeks ago. The staff is still learning the new system, but it is going really, really well, so that's good. Another item is the Washington County Department of Public Health and Environment completed their compliance check training for retailers in Washington County who sell alcohol and tobacco products. Forest Lake retailers, Cloudex Vape, Keys Cafe and Bakery, Liquor Works, Stella's on 97, and the VFW all had employees who attended that training, and I want to thank them for doing that. I think that's great. And lastly, the Forest Lake Safety Camp is being hosted here at the City Center in the next couple of days. Tuesday and Wednesday. There will be approximately 100 kids that will be attending the camp. They'll be learning about bike safety, fire safety, electrical safety, water safety, and many other activities that will be going on. Though there are many businesses and volunteers that assist and donate to the Forest Lake Safety Camp, I definitely want to publicly thank the Public Works Department. They did a great job of setting up the area for us and for tearing it down on Wednesday. The Fire Department for graciously allowing us to utilize a large portion of their space for the event, and to the Forest Lake Lions Club, who's going to be donating food and feeding the campers and the junior counselors and volunteers at the event for the next couple of days. That's all I have for you, unless you have some questions for me.
Chief, since we changed the speed limit on North Shore Trail, and now that summer's here, are we apprehending anybody, or where are we at on that?
Well, I'm not real sure on any apprehensions and or even citations on that, but we've definitely been out there. We've had the speed trailer out there a few times, and personally, I feel like people have slowed down, but I'm sure there might be some people that live out there that might not agree with that statement. But we definitely are spending more time out there and enforcing the speed limit. And I'm glad you brought that up. It made me remember that with the speed trailer, if anyone is interested in getting that out in their area or on any roads that they feel it would assist with speeders, give us a call at the police department, and we can put you on the list and we can get the speed trailer out there.
All right. The new record management system, is that actually in the squad cars? Is that what they use, right?
It's actually in, physically in our office. It's in our squad cars as well. And same with every other police department and the sheriff's office here in Washington County.
So that is your main
software
system?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yep.
Ed?
I do have one other question, and it happened to me, so that's why I'm asking, but I tried to renew my tabs through the mail, and I sent them in like on April 28th, and I received them yesterday. So I guess my question to you is, when people are stopped with expired tabs, is there any leniency? Because when I called, and I called the motor vehicle department and said, what happens if I get stopped and my plate's expired already? I said, you're subject to a ticket. And I said, even though I got my check and everything in the mail?
Yeah,
unless they cashed it, you're on the hook.
Yeah, we've been notified by the Department of Vehicle Services about their issues with their software program that they rolled out quite a while ago, and they're still having issues with it. I was in that same boat. Tabs, expired, mailed them in, waited up to, I think we were about 3 months. I had a friend that was 6 months out. We definitely understand what you're going through, and yes, we are pretty lenient with that.
What's really strange is when I talked to the lady at the motor vehicle, she says, why don't you just come in? We have tabs here. And like, they're on the same computer system, using the same piece of paper for registration, and they can hand you the tab, but the state can't mail them out. So
well, it's not only the tabs as well, it's when you buy a new vehicle or you need
I'm just
new
talking about
license
a
plates,
renewal.
same thing. Yeah.
Well, they're looking for another 46 million to fix
Yeah,
it.
another 46 million. It's despicable.
Oh. Any other questions for the chief? All right. Bailey?
Nothing from me, thank you.
All right. And Dan?
Comp plan, we got the final draft of the draft comp plan. Donovan's just going through it right now to make sure everything is where it should be. Once he completes that review this week, I'll get that posted on the website, we'll distribute it to council and planning commission as well. So that will come out, so we finally have the document, and I just told him, I said, make sure that, there's no surprises in there. It's what was discussed, and he's going through that right now, so once that review is done, it'll get posted. Just a reminder, Arts in the Park is officially up and running again, so there's another Arts in the Park tomorrow night at Lakeside Memorial Park. And then we also have had the new employees start. They're getting trained in at this point, picking up the new workflows extremely well. We're getting a lot of that backlog of work that kind of built up over the past few months. We're making some pretty good headway on there. A couple of the seasonals that we have in the office are We have like 3 or 4 boxes of old receipts that needed to get verified that they're in our archives are now getting ready for document destruction. So a lot of that work that was kind of sitting off in the wings is now getting addressed and getting cranked out. So that's great news to kind of, it's been nice to see kind of work going from over to needs to be done to completed pile. So it's been a nice benefit there. That's what I have. If there's any other questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
All right, thank you. Bridget?
Thank you, Your Honor. Nothing to report this evening.
All right. Ryan?
Mayor, City Council, I'll just comment on a few things. Tonight in the EDA meeting, Dan handed out a nice summary of all the redevelopment or subdivision projects. I think it would be appropriate maybe to email out just to give you guys a feel of kind of what's all going on in the community. The Safe Routes to School sidewalk extension project will start after the 4th of July, as a large portion of that's within the staging or high traffic areas of the parade, so we'll avoid that altogether. A local maintenance project, we'll have the east side of the project pretty much wrapped up by the 4th of July, and then the other area would start after the 4th of July, as we previously talked. I suppose now is appropriate time to kind of talk about the bonding bill, as obviously upon the veto, a large bill was approved. A few communities around us were successful. Nashwasago County on Highway 8 obtained $3 million. Anoka County got $17 million between 2 projects. White Bear Lake got $4 million. Obviously, Highway 97 was not awarded in that, so that'd be appropriate time for you guys to follow up with your local representatives on what they may have heard or discussed through, you know, all the negotiations on stuff, and what do we need to do to better our future submittal. But if we don't probably do that within next month, a lot of information will be lost and not being able to utilize for future applications. So I encourage you to reach out to those people that have that ability to know what was going on and discuss those bills, where we really fell in comparison to a pretty big list of other areas in the state. So that's all I have, unless there's some specific questions.
How much did Chisago County get?
$3 million.
$3 million, okay.
For Highway 8, is
Yep.
that right?
So
Was it all Highway 8?
Highway 8. So with that, obviously, that wouldn't fund a construction project, but that's certainly gonna put them in a position to get something more shovel-ready, which then that's what the next request typically is, and that's really what Anoka County's been doing. You know, I see the one larger portion was Thurston Boulevard, where previously they got other funding for preparation, environmental stuff, like, you know, just kind of been building up, and it's kind of their second go around there, so that'll actually lead to some improvements now. So anything helps, obviously, but, you know, just to get, you know, $3 million for Highway 8, that's gonna be able to do a lot of things for things up there in planning, whether it's either property acquisition for right-of-way or some environmental documentation work that needs to be done or updated. And then they can move forward with future applications, or maybe even some small spots improvements, whether it's just signing and striping improvements to make Highway 8 safety. That's kind of their objective at this point, is to make Highway 8 more accessible and safety driven. So I know in the past we may have seen and heard that Highway 8 could potentially be a 4-lane road. They're very hesitant to say that, because ultimately that might not mean a 4-lane road someday, based on other improvements that could go along with it, or alternative routes in the area. So long story short is we didn't make the list, and we need to find out why, so.
I have a question, Ryan, and it goes back to the 35 construction project. And when they presented in front of us, and I was one that requested possibly of getting a sound wall along Clear Lake, and we were told that there's no lane expansion, therefore you don't qualify. But I just drove that new lane that they just opened. There's no shoulder anymore. That's lane all the way to where the shoulder used to be. So they definitely are widening that road.
So I could certainly follow up with that, but you might too be confused by how they are staging some of the striping. You know, I don't know, I haven't seen this.
Well, they just opened it would be the eastern portion of it.
So sometimes.
And there's no median left. There used to be like heck, almost a 6-foot shoulder. It's not there anymore. It's lane all the way up to the.
So if it's gonna be concrete, they're gonna probably make the shoulder concrete, so they don't have to come back again.
Oh, you think when they restripe, that'll be median then?
Well, they're just trying to maximize room so they can continue the shifts. So I would have to follow up and see a specific plan, as this is design build. They're doing it on the fly kind of thing. So I haven't actually seen a construction plan set for anything on 35, but I certainly can obtain that. Obviously, they got plans set for that section done.
I would appreciate if you look into that.
All right, thanks, Ryan. Sam?
Yeah, I attended the watershed district meetings for the Comfort Lake, Forest Lake Watershed District meeting, and they focused on a couple things, the water monitoring report and the Third Lake Pond project update. And they focused on some work that was being done around Bone Lake, trying to prevent some runoff into the lake. And that was kind of the focus of that particular meeting. I also attended the Forest Lake School District meeting. And besides paying the bills and that sort of thing, the big thing was talking about what would happen if the bond or the referendum doesn't pass this fall. So they're just trying to gear up for whatever possibility could happen there. So that's pretty well it.
All right, thanks. Ed?
I attended the Joint Fire Board. Al pretty much covered that. He had a nice presentation of what occurred over the past year involving the fire department and a little bit of where we're going in the future. I think the Joint Fire Board, as far as Columbus and Forest Lake, whatever animosities existed before, they're kind of like gone. I think it's really working well. They seem to be satisfied, so that's good. Credit to you, Al. Then the other thing I attended was the Airport Commission. That was a very good meeting, and it was quiet. There was a little finger pointing for a brief moment, but it's moving in the right direction. It's getting more civil and better, and Don, who's chairing that commission, is doing an excellent job. That's all I have.
All right, thank you. Since I was out of town for the last couple of weeks, I really don't have anything to update as far as meetings go, but I did want to announce the appointment for an open seat on our Parks, Lakes, and Trails Commission to Tim Miller. And I don't know, do we need a council vote or just, okay. So can we do that now, or do we have to add that on to the next meeting?
Mayor, members of the council, so I'm just pulling up the commission appointment process for that particular commission. Typically, if it's a new item of business, we would just put it on the next meeting. But let me just confirm if I could.
Sure, that's fine. Well, why don't we move on with updates and then we'll get that afterwards.
I also attended the fire board meeting, my first one. It was well put on. And Parks, Trails, Lakes Commission hasn't met yet, but we are hoping to get this other appointment to fill the commission before the next meeting. They were having some trouble making a quorum in the past, and hopefully this appointment can make them more productive.
All right, thank you. Mara?
Just one quick update. Planning Commission meeting was canceled this last time, meeting again on Wednesday. And then I attended the Rush Line Task Force meeting. Remember, Rush Line is bus rapid transit. This segment is focused primarily on St. Paul to White Bear Lake. However, there is still on that plan that dotted line bus connector service up to Forest Lake. So part of this last meeting was a little bit of conversation on doing a northern Washington County separate breakout task force, just to make sure that in all of the work that's being done in the primary segment that we aren't forgetting about the Forest Lake answer. I will keep you posted as that gets as that gets scheduled, and maybe would be a good workshop conversation for us just to have a conversation on what is Forest Lake's ask of that. What is our ask of that? What information do we want to be going in to, what do we want that answer to look like? We could help shape that. Those dollars that are paying that project, Washington County has a lot of transit dollars in that, so would be nice to have some part of Washington County covered, but with the focus being, again, primarily on the primary lines, if we aren't vocal, I'm a little concerned that it just gets easy to get brushed aside. So We'll get a task force meeting scheduled, and I'll work with Dan to get something on a workshop agenda, just so we're on the same page walking into that.
All right. Sounds good. Bridget.
Thank you, Your Honor. So just to circle back, under the council rules of procedure, no item of business shall be considered for action that doesn't appear on the agenda unless it's a trivial matter. Although the council could certainly make a motion to amend the agenda at this point to include that as an agenda item. So the motion would be to amend the agenda to include appointment of a new commission member for the Parks, Lakes, and Trails Commission, followed by a motion to make that appointment, Your Honor, which is, again, an appointment made by the mayor with the consent of the council. So if the goal is to get that on the agenda tonight, it certainly could be accomplished that way.
Sounds good.
Dan, do you know, is there a commission meeting before our next council meeting?
Let me take a look.
I know Jamie was hopeful to get a full commission.
There is Bailey just told me there is a Parks, Lakes, and Trails Commission meeting next Tuesday, which would be the following, next council meeting is the 2 Mondays from now, so there is one in between.
I'd like to make a motion to amend the agenda with the addition of an appointment.
I'll second.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, so the agenda is now amended, so I will make an appointment, Tim Miller for the Parks, Lakes, and Trails Commission.
I'll second the appointment.
All right. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carried. Now I'll look for a motion to adjourn.
I got one other thing. Dave from Public Works is not here, but in the drive-in today, the medians coming in on 61 have never looked so nice. And I don't know if that's attributable to Dave, but they were nice and green and cut, and they look good.
All right. We'll make sure he hears about that.
And I made the motion to adjourn, so.
I'll second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Meeting adjourned.